No one wakes up one day and decides to abandon righteousness. Moral decay doesn't happen in an instant. It happens through small, seemingly harmless compromises. A person makes one exception, justifies one unethical decision, ignores one warning sign, and before they realize it, they are someone they never thought they would become. This is the slow erosion of Dharma, and it's a process seen throughout history, from great kings to ordinary people. The Mahabharata is full of characters who were once noble but lost their way, not through one grand betrayal, but through a series of small moral failures that stacked upon each other. But why does this happen? Because life tests integrity constantly. Karma places individuals in situations that force them to choose between comfort and righteousness, ambition and justice, self-interest and duty. Sometimes, the right choice is hard, while the wrong choice is easy. People justify their actions with, just this once, or everyone else is doing it. That's how self-mastery erodes, by failing to recognize when the ego, greed, or fear starts whispering in the background. Arjuna himself struggled with this on the battlefield, questioning whether his dharma was worth the pain it would bring. Look at the world today. How often do we see people who once had good intentions compromising their values for power, wealth, or approval? A politician starts their career wanting to serve, then slowly bends to corruption. A business leader prioritizes profits over ethics, justifying every small step away from integrity. Even in personal life, someone enters a relationship, job, or social circle that encourages them to ignore their intuition. Before long, they no longer recognize themselves. The Bhagavad Gita warns that losing sight of self-awareness and righteousness leads to suffering and internal conflict. And yet, there's always a moment of choice, a chance to realign with Dharma before it's too late. The difference between those who fall completely and those who redeem themselves is self-reflection. Are you aware when your attachments and desires pull you away from your true path? Do you question your own motives? Or do you simply follow impulses? Krishna teaches that the key to avoiding moral downfall is practicing detachment and self-discipline, acting with wisdom rather than being ruled by temporary emotions or ambition. And if someone does fall, redemption is always possible. No one is beyond repair. The Mahabharata shows that even those who have strayed can return to Dharma, but it requires courage, self-awareness, and surrendering the ego. But what happens when someone ignores these warnings, refuses to question themselves, and lets resentment and bitterness guide them? That's where Karna's story begins, a lesson in how loyalty and unchecked wounds can lead even a noble soul astray. Chapter 1. Karna's story, the dangers of loyalty and unchecked resentment. Karna is one of the most tragic figures in the Mahabharata, a man of immense talent, discipline, and courage, yet doomed by his own inner struggles. His story is not just about fate. It's about the dangers of resentment, unchecked emotions, and misplaced loyalty. He was born a warrior but spent his life being denied his rightful place. This deep sense of rejection and humiliation made him vulnerable to the one person who gave him validation, Duryodhana. And in this lies the greatest lesson. When someone allows their wounds to dictate their choices, they risk aligning with the wrong forces. Loyalty is often seen as a virtue, but Karna's life proves that blind loyalty can be a curse. He was so grateful to Duryodhana for offering him status and friendship that he ignored Dharma. He knew Duryodhana was driven by jealousy, greed, and ambition, yet he stood by him, even when it meant fighting against righteousness. This happens in real life too. How many people stay in toxic friendships, jobs, or relationships because of past favors? How often do people let resentment push them toward paths they wouldn't have chosen otherwise? Karna's tragedy was that he let his personal wounds overpower his sense of justice and resentment. It's a poison that clouds judgment. Karna's bitterness toward the Pandavas made him unable to see clearly. He wasn't fighting for justice. He was fighting to prove himself. This is the danger of unresolved emotions. They turn personal struggles into external wars. The Bhagavad Gita warns about the power of anger, jealousy, and wounded pride. These emotions distort reality, making someone think they're fighting for righteousness when, in reality, they're just reacting from pain. The deeper truth? Karna had the chance to break free. Krishna himself offered him an opportunity to stand with Dharma, revealing his true lineage as the eldest Pandava. But Karna refused, bound by ego, attachment, and misplaced gratitude. This is what happens when the lower self dominates. The need to be right or to prove a point becomes greater than the truth. How often do people reject opportunities for growth because they are too attached to their old identities, grudges, or pain? Karna's story is a warning. Loyalty without wisdom is dangerous, and resentment without healing is destructive. No matter how talented, disciplined, or righteous someone may be, if they let anger and wounds guide them, they risk self-sabotage. But Karna is not the only example of how internal struggles can lead to downfall. If his story is about blind loyalty and resentment, then Duryodhana's story is about something even darker: jealousy, entitlement, and the self-destruction of envy. Chapter 2. The influence of envy and comparison. The Duryodhana archetype. If Karna's downfall was driven by resentment, Duryodhana's was fueled by something even more corrosive: envy and entitlement. His hatred for the Pandavas wasn't because they wronged him, but because they existed. He couldn't stand that they were loved, respected, and successful, even though he had wealth, power, and privilege. And that's the curse of comparison. It blinds people to what they have and makes them obsessed with what others possess. Duryodhana is the ultimate warning of what happens when jealousy consumes a person's soul. This mindset is everywhere today. Social media has turned people into modern Duryodhanas, constantly comparing, constantly feeling inferior, constantly needing to prove something. Someone sees another person succeeding, and instead of being inspired, they feel bitter, resentful, and desperate to compete. Duryodhana could have ruled wisely, built alliances, and strengthened his kingdom, but instead, he wasted his life trying to destroy others just because they had what he wanted. This is what happens when someone focuses on others' paths instead of their own dharma. But envy alone isn't the problem. It's what it turns into. In Duryodhana's case, it became delusion. He truly believed he was the rightful ruler, that the Pandavas were his enemies, and that his selfish ambition was actually justice. This is what happens when ego blinds self-awareness. A person justifies unethical actions because they feel like the victim. They start believing their anger, greed, and bitterness are righteous. The Bhagavad Gita warns that once someone loses their grip on reality, they become slaves to their own ignorance. And what was the result? Total destruction. Duryodhana lost everything: his kingdom, his family, his life, because he refused to let go of jealousy and entitlement. Instead of working on himself, he spent his entire existence fighting shadows, chasing validation, and proving himself to people who never needed him to prove anything. How many people today do the same? They chase status, power, and recognition, only to realize, too late, that they spent their whole life playing a meaningless game. Duryodhana proves that the real enemy isn't outside, but within. Envy, ego, and attachment destroy a person from the inside out, unless they learn to control them. The solution? Self-awareness, self-mastery, and detachment. Learning to celebrate others' success, focusing on personal dharma, and breaking free from the illusion of comparison. But if envy is one poison, anger and impulsiveness are another. And that's exactly what led to the downfall of Ashwatthama. Chapter 3. The consequences of uncontrolled emotions. Ashwatthama's rage. Anger, when unchecked, is a weapon that turns against the one who wields it. Ashwatthama's story in the Mahabharata is the perfect example of how a moment of uncontrolled rage can lead to irreversible destruction. He was not inherently evil. He was a warrior, a son of a revered teacher, and a man seeking honor. But when he let grief, anger, and wounded pride take over, he made a choice that stained his name forever. This is the danger of emotional reactivity. It makes people act in ways they can never take back. Most people believe that anger gives them power, but the truth is, anger steals power. Ashwatthama felt humiliated and enraged after the death of his father, Duryodhana. Instead of controlling his emotions, he let them consume him. In a blind act of revenge, he infiltrated the Pandava camp at night and slaughtered innocent warriors while they slept, including the 5 sons of the Drupadi. This wasn't justice. This wasn't honor. This was rage turning into mindless destruction. How often do people ruin friendships, careers, or relationships because they speak or act in a moment of uncontrolled emotion? The Bhagavad Gita teaches that self-mastery is impossible without mastering emotions. Krishna warns Arjuna that rage, jealousy, and grief cloud the mind, making a person a puppet of their impulses. And yet, how many times do people let their emotions dictate their actions? A fight with a loved one turns into cruel words they can't take back. A moment of jealousy turns into a decision that leads to self-sabotage. The problem is never the emotion itself. The problem is letting emotions take control. And what was Ashwatthama's fate? Regret, destruction, isolation. His desperate attempt to hurt others out of pain left him cursed and broken. This is the lesson. Acting from anger never leads to peace. The only way to truly overcome pain is through self-awareness and detachment. Understanding emotions without becoming enslaved by them. Instead of reacting in rage, one must pause, observe, and then choose the right action. Meditation, deep breathing, and reflection are not just spiritual concepts. They are tools that keep the lower self from taking control. Ashwatthama's story is a warning. Never let temporary emotions create permanent consequences. Anger may feel powerful in the moment, but it always costs more than it gives. True warriors, whether on the battlefield or in life, control their emotions instead of being controlled by them. And this leads to a deeper truth. What truly drives people toward destruction and suffering? The answer is uncontrolled desire and greed, the very forces that Krishna warns against in the Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 4, Desire, Greed, and the Root of Suffering. Krishna makes it clear in the Bhagavad Gita, uncontrolled desire is the root of suffering. And yet, people chase it endlessly. They believe that once they get more money, more power, more recognition, they will finally be at peace. But the truth? Desire only creates more desire. No matter how much someone gains, the mind will always demand more. And when greed takes hold, dharma is forgotten, self-mastery is lost, and suffering becomes inevitable. This is why the Gita teaches detachment. Not to reject ambition, but to free oneself from the illusion that external things bring true fulfillment. Look around. How many people sacrifice everything in pursuit of status, power, or possessions, only to end up feeling more empty and restless? History is full of kings, CEOs, and celebrities who had everything, but still felt lost and unfulfilled. In the Mahabharata, figures like Duryodhana, Shakuni, and even Karna fell victim to their attachments and greed, unable to see that their suffering came from within. The more they clung to their desires, the more they strayed from righteousness and self-awareness. And here's where it gets dangerous. Desire becomes an addiction. At first, it seems harmless. A person wants success, recognition, or a better life. But soon, they aren't seeking growth. They are chasing validation, control, and dominance. Greed is like fire. It starts small but consumes everything in its path. In modern life, this manifests as burnout, stress, and endless dissatisfaction. People become slaves to their own ambitions, constantly moving goalposts, never allowing themselves to rest. The mind convinces them that peace is just one more achievement away, but it never arrives. So what's the way out? Karma Yoga, acting without attachment. Krishna teaches that one must work, create, and strive, but without becoming a prisoner of desire. This means doing your duty without obsessing over results, seeking success without letting it define your worth, and knowing when to walk away without regret. A person who masters this lives in the world, but is not controlled by it. They achieve, but they are not enslaved by their achievements. They pursue goals, but their inner peace does not depend on their outcomes. And this leads to the next great illusion: ego and attachment. If desire is the fire that burns people from the inside, ego is the fuel that keeps it alive. Many don't realize that their greatest enemy is not outside of them. It's their own attachment to identity, status, and control. This is the next trap that Krishna warns against: how ego distorts judgment and leads to downfall. Chapter 5: The Ego Trap. How attachment blinds judgment. Ego is the most dangerous illusion. It makes a person believe they are in control while leading them straight into self-destruction. Krishna warns Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita that attachment to identity, status, and recognition clouds judgment, making a person blind to reality. How many times do people refuse to admit they're wrong, even when all signs point to their mistake? How often do they stay in toxic situations just because they don't want to be seen as weak? This is the ego trap: choosing illusion over truth, control over wisdom. The Mahabharata is filled with figures who let their ego dictate their choices. Duryodhana refused to share power. Karna refused Krishna's offer to stand with Dharma. And even Bhishma, a man of great wisdom, remained loyal to a corrupt throne out of a misplaced sense of duty. Ego convinces people that they must protect their image at all costs, even when it means betraying their own well-being and dharma. In everyday life, this happens when people hold on to grudges, refuse to apologize, or let pride destroy relationships. The more someone is attached to their false sense of self, the harder it is to see clearly. And what does attachment actually create? Suffering. A person clings to their status, fearing loss. They define themselves by their achievements, fearing failure. They attach their worth to relationships, fearing abandonment. This is why Krishna teaches detachment, not to make people indifferent, but to free them from the emotional chains that distort their judgment. Imagine making decisions without fear of losing status, approval, or control. Imagine living with clarity, acting from wisdom instead of impulse. That is true self-mastery. The hardest truth to accept: nothing truly belongs to us. Not wealth, not status, not even identity. The Bhagavad Gita reminds us that everything is temporary, except the soul. People waste lifetimes chasing validation, only to realize too late that it was all an illusion. True power isn't in controlling the external world. It's in mastering the mind and detaching from illusions. The strongest person is not the one who dominates others, but the one who has conquered themselves. But how does one break free from the ego trap? Krishna teaches that everything in life is governed by the gunas, the three fundamental forces of nature. Understanding these forces, sattva, goodness, rajas, passion, and tamas, ignorance, is the key to recognizing the hidden influences that shape thoughts, emotions, and actions. Chapter 6: The Role of the Gunas. Understanding the forces that shape behavior. Why do people act the way they do? Why do some lean toward wisdom and peace, while others fall into chaos and destruction? Krishna explains to Arjuna that all human behavior is shaped by three gunas: sattva, goodness; rajas, passion; and tamas, ignorance. These forces aren't just philosophical concepts. They're the hidden currents driving every thought, emotion, and decision. Understanding them is the key to breaking free from negative cycles and achieving self-mastery. Sattva represents clarity, wisdom, and self-awareness. A person under sattva's influence seeks truth, righteousness, and balance. They are driven by dharma, not greed. Think of the calm leader who makes decisions based on wisdom, not ego, or the individual who practices detachment, meditation, and self-discipline. unaffected by external chaos. Sattva is the guna of light and knowledge, but it must be cultivated through self-reflection, mindful living, and conscious choices. Then comes rajas, the guna of passion, ambition, and restlessness. It's neither good nor bad. It's pure energy, but when unchecked, it leads to attachment, suffering, and never-ending desire. A person dominated by rajas is never satisfied, always chasing more, always comparing, always seeking external validation. This is the energy of competition, greed, and emotional instability. It drives people to achieve, but also to burn out, get lost in materialism, and make impulsive decisions. The modern world runs on rajas, constant motion, constant stimulation, but very little inner peace. And at the lowest level is tamas, ignorance, laziness, and confusion. Tamas creates denial, avoidance, and self-destruction. A person stuck in tamas ignores truth, resists change, and clings to illusions. They justify their failures, blame others, and refuse to take responsibility. This is the guna of depression, addiction, and self-sabotage, the energy that drags people down when they lose sight of their purpose and dharma. Krishna warns that without awareness, tamas can completely consume a person's soul, leading them into darkness and suffering. But here's the good news. The gunas are not fixed. A person can rise from tamas to rajas, and from rajas to sattva, through self-awareness, discipline, and conscious action. This is why self-reflection and spiritual practice are essential. Reading the Bhagavad Gita, meditating, practicing karma yoga, and surrounding oneself with higher influences all help shift the mind towards sattva. The key is to recognize when rajas is causing restlessness or when tamas is pulling you into stagnation, and then take action to realign with clarity and purpose. And once someone understands this, then they see the truth about free will, that while karma may shape circumstances, it does not dictate destiny. Krishna's final lesson to Arjuna is the ultimate realization. Free will exists, but only for those who surrender their ego and act without attachment. Chapter 7. The Power of Free Will, Surrendering to the Divine and Overcoming Karma. One of the biggest misconceptions about karma is that it means people are trapped by fate, with no control over their lives. But Krishna reveals to Arjuna a higher truth. Karma may shape circumstances, but free will determines destiny. Every action, every choice, every moment of self-awareness creates a ripple that can break cycles of suffering. But the key, one must act with detachment, surrendering the ego and aligning with dharma. True freedom is not in control, but in surrendering to the divine order while taking full responsibility for one's actions. The Bhagavad Gita introduces the concept of karma yoga, selfless action without attachment to results. This is the path to liberation from suffering. Most people act with expectations, hoping for rewards, fearing failure. But Krishna teaches that the highest way to live is to do what must be done, without obsessing over success or loss. Imagine working hard but being free from the stress of outcome. Imagine taking action without being controlled by fear, ego, or external approval. That is the power of surrendering to the divine while exercising free will. But surrender does not mean passivity. It means alignment, acting from wisdom instead of attachment, clarity instead of impulse. Think about it. When someone resists life, clings to the past, or tries to force things to go their way, they suffer. But when they let go, trust the process, and take action from a place of dharma, they move with the natural flow of karma instead of against it. The difference between struggle and peace is whether a person is fighting reality or accepting and working with it. And what about past karma? Krishna teaches that while past actions may create obstacles and tendencies, they do not define the future. Every person has the power to choose differently, to break patterns, to rise above past mistakes. But to do this, they must first let go of victim mentality. The moment someone stops blaming fate, others, or past circumstances and starts taking full ownership of their thoughts, actions, and emotions, they begin to rewrite their own karma. This is the ultimate lesson of the Bhagavad Gita, that true power is not in controlling the world, but in mastering oneself. When a person acts with self-discipline, detachment, and surrender, they transcend suffering, transcend karma, and step into true freedom. The war is never outside, it is within. And the ones who understand this, they are the ones who truly win the battle of life. Conclusion: the choice between light and darkness. Now you see it. The slow, subtle descent into destruction isn't a myth, it's a pattern. It's the same trap Karna, Duryodhana, and Ashwatthama fell into. And if you think it can't happen to you, that's the first mistake. The real battle isn't outside, it's inside. It's happening every day, in every choice you make. So what are you feeding? Are you letting ego, resentment, comparison, and desire dictate your life? Are you making decisions based on fear, attachment, and the need for validation? Or are you choosing dharma, self-awareness, self-mastery, and wisdom? Krishna makes it clear, you are not bound by karma, but by your own lack of awareness. The moment you take control of your thoughts, actions, and emotions, you take control of your destiny. Look back on your own life. Where have you made decisions you now regret? Where has anger clouded your judgment? Where has envy stolen your peace? The first step to change is recognition. The second, action. Break the cycle before it breaks you. Detach from what poisons your mind. Align yourself with truth, not temporary emotions. Learn to master your impulses instead of letting them master you. But now, I want to hear from you. Which lesson from this video hit you the hardest? Which internal battle are you struggling with right now? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. And if you want to keep learning about self-mastery, karma, and the hidden wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the battle for your mind isn't over. It's just beginning.